Welcome to the Phoenix Trainer. I'm Patrick. I want to talk about working your core as a secondary muscle group. So whenever we work out, our core is almost always involved. Pretty much the only time your core really isn't involved in supporting you in some way or another is when you're sleeping. The core's main function is stability and force transfer. So if you're throwing a ball, you take a step and then you follow through, right? So all that basically from the ground is where the force starts getting generated, the hip moves, and then the torso turns, and then the hand throws, right? So all of that force gets translated through your core. The core obviously supports you when you're walking. So whenever you're walking, yeah, you're supported. Even when you're sitting, if you're sitting properly, or hopefully sitting as properly as you can, you're supporting your core. Carrying anything is really going to work your core. Almost anything we do, the core is involved some way or another, like I said, other than sleeping. One of the things that's really helpful to do is get off of machines. So when you're in like a light fitness machine or some type of resistance machine where you're seated, your back is supported, you're really robbing your core of doing any extra work to support you while you're doing this movement. So if you're in a chest press machine, your back is supported, you're seated, and all you're doing is pressing, the core is not doing a whole lot. Okay, it's all your shoulders, triceps, pectorals, all that's getting involved, but pretty much your core is just sitting there. So what I propose is do movements where you're freestanding, you're off of a machine. Squats, deadlifts, of course, are huge for working your core. I like to do a lot of unilateral movements. So instead of working bilaterally, where I'm using both hands or both legs and doing, say, like a bench press, is you'll get on the bench, you use a dumbbell press, and you'll do one. So you'll do a unilateral movement, and you'll just press with one arm. Now what happens is, when you're lying on that bench and you're pressing, the weight wants to pull you off to the one side. So you've got to tighten up your core to keep yourself from basically rolling off of the bench. Same thing with overhead press movements, pulling movements. I do one arm, lat pull downs. Anything like that is going to make your core work a lot harder because it has to stabilize that weight that's off center. I do a lot of carries where I do a single-sided carry. So you get like a kettlebell, like a 50-pound kettlebell or something, and just grab one and take it for a walk. And the idea is you want to keep your shoulders nice and square, not tilted one way or the other. Our tendency when we carry a suitcase is to overcompensate and kind of lean off to the one side, right? So your obliques are really tightening up on this side, but you're kind of leaning over this way. So what I do is I'm going to make sure that I'm nice and tall and proud, my shoulders are back, and they're even, right? They're parallel with the floor. I'm not leaning one way or the other, which in turn makes your core work a whole lot harder. It's harder to do a single carry than it is to do a double carry. I'll be talking about carries in the future. It's one of my favorite exercises, and talk about simple. It's one of the simplest things you can do, carry heavy stuff around. So, kettlebell carries, farmer's walks, suitcase carry, ruck hiking with a loaded pack that's got quite a bit of weight in it. Any of those things will really work on your core strength and overall strength. I mean, it's one of the easiest ways to actually build strength overall, a whole body movement. But like I said, it's something I want to talk about in the future, and I'm going to dedicate a whole video to it. I like to use a lot of bands in my unilateral movements, to get my core a little bit more involved. What I like about the bands is that when the resistance first starts, it's not all that tight. But as I move forward through the movement, the tension becomes a lot greater. It's not like using a weight. The other thing with the bands is that I can put that anchor point anywhere, as opposed to using a dumbbell or a kettlebell. I have to put my body in a position to make that resistance work because gravity pulls down. But with the bands, I can anchor them anywhere, and I can really work my my core that way. I like to take my stance, rather than having my feet being parallel when I'm doing a unilateral movement, is I do a split stance. So I've got one foot behind me and one foot in front of me. What tends to happen is if you put your feet in parallel against the anchor of pull or against the point of resistance, is you'll tend to lean. On a pulling movement, you'll tend to lean back. On a pushing movement, you'll tend to lean forward. So if you split your stance, you basically take that away. So you're not letting gravity help you by leaning. So if you split the stance, you get yourself upright, and on top of that, on top of your core getting work, your hips get a lot of work, and so does especially the rear leg, whatever leg is working against that pull, or I should say your forward leg. If you're doing a pull, it's your forward leg. If you're doing a push, it's your rear leg. But that's one thing I've really noticed for myself when I've been doing, especially a lot of the band work, is that my legs are getting a great deal of work just from the isometric hold that I've got to maintain to keep myself from leaning back or pulling back when I'm using the band. There's also a number of bilateral movements you can do. A real good one, for instance, is tricep press down. What happens is because the weight wants to pull you up, okay, your abs have to contract a little bit to hold that position. If any of you have ever done this, where you're pushing like a heavy tricep press down or triceps press down, you'll notice that your body will start to shake a little bit, and it's because your abdominals are contracting so hard to keep you from going back. So that's a really good way to work your core, and that's a bilateral movement. Of course, the classic one is going to be a push-up. We talked about planks before. Basically, a push-up is a plank, only I'm moving, I'm going up and down, right? The great thing about doing a push-up is that I'm also doing an isometric hold with my core muscles supporting me as I'm doing my push-ups. So that's another bilateral movement that works your core really well. One of the great things about unilateral work is that it helps identify weakness. So if you're doing bench press and you're doing bilateral bench press, in other words, both arms are working, and then you go to unilateral where you're doing dumbbell presses, you may notice that your left side or your right side is weaker than the other. That's something you won't discover when you're doing a bench press, or it's at least a lot harder to discover. For most of us, our offhand, the hand we're not dominant with, is the weaker of the two sides. So one of the ways you can work on improving that strength of that side that's a little bit weaker than the other is you can do unilateral work and try to bump that other side up a little bit and try to get that a little more even. And by doing so, you'll actually improve the bilateral work on top of it. So I wanted to demonstrate two movements, one pulling movement, one pushing movement, to kind of go over what we were talking about as far as unilateral is concerned and using the band specifically. So I've got two things set up here. I've got a low pull and a high press set up, or a low press. So we'll do the pull first. So I like to get myself set, and like I said, I want to split my stance. So I'm putting one leg behind me and one leg in front of me. I'm going to square myself to the anchor point of the band. I'm going to get myself nice and tall, shoulders back, chest out, and then I'm going to row. Now what's happening is, because the band is under tension the whole time, the band wants to pull this direction, it wants to pull me down and twist me. So I am resisting that. And of course, at the end of the pull, the tension's increased because it's a band. So as it's going back, I'm getting a whole lot more tension on myself. But by doing it with the split stance, I'm working my hips, my legs, my core obviously, and it's all under like an isometric type tension. Now, for the pressing movement, it's the same idea. So when I get myself set, I'm putting one leg back, one leg forward. I'm getting myself in a nice tall position, and I'm pressing. And now this band, of course, wants to pull me back this way, but I'm going to stay square to the point of anchor on the band. Just like that. Now, of course, it's a lot of other unilateral exercises. Pretty much anything you can do bilaterally, you can do unilaterally. The bands, for me, add a little extra tension as far as the torso is concerned. You can obviously use like a bench press with a single dumbbell on the bench, but you're really not getting the full core resistance or the tension required, or the tension that you get from doing the bands. Doing anything unilaterally is going to really help benefit your core and strengthen your core. As far as lower body, upper body, doesn't matter. Anything that's done unilaterally is going to really emphasize the strength of your core. Anyway, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. If you like the channel, please subscribe, hit the like button. If you've got any suggestions, please forward those too as well. Anyway, stay strong, stay safe.